I still remember the exact moment everything in my life started to feel like it was unraveling, though at the time, I had no idea. It was a Thursday evening in late October 2018, and the rain was hammering against the windows of our small apartment in Seattle, the kind of rain that makes the city smell like wet asphalt and coffee, the kind that seeps into your bones if you stand still long enough. I was sitting on the living room couch, scrolling through my phone, waiting for Emma to get home from work. She had promised to be back by 6, but it was already past 7, and the apartment felt unusually quiet. Not the comforting, peaceful quiet you sometimes get when the world is calm. It was heavy, almost suffocating, like the air itself was holding its breath. Emma and I had been together for almost 8 years. We met back in college, at the University of Washington, freshman year, both awkward and way too serious for our age. I was studying computer science, drowning in code and caffeine, and she was in graphic design, always sketching something in her notebook, headphones around her neck like her own personal bubble. We clicked instantly. Something about her laugh, the way her eyes crinkled when she smiled, made me feel like maybe I wasn't completely a mess. Fast forward 8 years, and we were married, living in that little apartment above the corner coffee shop on 15th. I thought I knew everything about her, or at least enough that I didn't have to question it. I tried calling her once, then twice. Nothing. Her phone went straight to voicemail. I felt a familiar tightening in my chest, a mix of impatience and something I couldn't quite name. I told myself she probably got caught up at work, maybe stayed late with a client, something mundane. Emma was meticulous with her job at the design firm she worked for, never late, never careless, always punctual, but my gut was prickling, and I hate ignoring it. I remember pacing the apartment, looking at the things we had collected together over the years. The framed Polaroid from our first trip to Portland, the tiny succulent on the windowsill she refused to let me kill, the stack of books by the couch, mostly hers, because I never read anything unless it was work-related. There's a weird comfort in familiarity, in knowing the small details of someone's life. It makes you feel safe. At least, that's what I thought. The uneasy feeling stayed with me all evening. By the time it hit 9, I had started texting a few mutual friends, but nobody had seen her. I even checked her social media, though I rarely did. Her Instagram feed was normal. Some work stuff, a latte she had taken a picture of a dog she liked at the park. Nothing seemed off, and that made my mind race even more. If everything looks normal, maybe nothing is wrong, or maybe it's exactly what she wants me to see. Sleep didn't come easy that night. I lay in bed staring at the ceiling, the shadows of the blinds moving with the occasional gust of wind outside. I replayed every moment of the past month in my head. I tried to find a clue, anything that felt out of place. Had she been distant? A little distracted? I thought about the small arguments we'd had over the last few weeks. Nothing major, just the usual frustrations about bills, chores, or me forgetting to take the trash out. But now, they felt different, like tiny puzzle pieces that didn't fit, pieces I hadn't wanted to notice until it was too late. I remember thinking about the night we got married, April. The cherry blossoms in the arboretum were in full bloom, and Emma wore that silk dress that caught the sunlight just right. I remember holding her hands, thinking, this is it. This is forever. I used to believe that. God, I still wanted, but there was something gnawing at me, some quiet dark suspicion I couldn't shake. Work the next day was torture. I couldn't concentrate. My co-workers noticed, of course they always do. I muttered through a few meetings, barely remembering to reply to email. My mind was a spiral of what-ifs, and maybe this is nothing. By lunch I found myself staring at her usual lunch spot at the cafe near the office, the one she always went to around 12:30. She never came. The thought that she could be somewhere else, somewhere I didn't know, twisted my stomach into knots. It was around mid-afternoon when I made the first mistake. I decided to check her email on her laptop. I know it's not something I'm proud of. Privacy matters. Trust matters. But desperation has a way of making you forget everything you learned about boundaries. I logged in, telling myself it was just to check if she had emailed anyone to explain why she was late. The first message that popped up didn't make sense. An unfamiliar name in the sender field. A casual "Hey, I'll see you tonight," that made my heart stop. I froze, staring at the screen like it might rearrange itself into something more comforting. but it did. I remember the exact smell in the room then, the faint scent of her shampoo lingering on the pillow, the coffee I had poured an hour ago, the rain still dripping outside. Everything smelled normal, but my chest felt like it was on fire. My hands shook as I scrolled through more messages, and with each one the realization began to settle like ice in my veins. She was seeing someone else, someone I didn't know, someone she hadn't mentioned, someone she was hiding. I remember sitting there for what felt like hours, staring at the screen, trying to deny it, trying to rationalize it. Maybe it wasn't what I thought, maybe it was just a friend, maybe. My mind raced through our life together, our Sunday morning pancakes, our annual trips to Portland, our silly inside jokes. How could this person exist in her life and not in mine? How could I have missed it? I didn't confront her immediately. I felt like a man drowning, clinging to fragments of normalcy, hoping they would keep me afloat. For the next week, I watched her carefully, noting small details, a text she hid too quickly, a phone call she answered in another room, a faint perfume that wasn't her. I told myself I was imagining things. I wanted to be wrong more than I wanted to be right. But the tension built, and then came the night of November 2nd. I'll never forget it. The rain had started again, heavier this time, thrashing against the windows like a warning. Emma had gone out for drinks with a friend, she said, but something felt off. My stomach twisted, a cold, sharp knot of dread. I remember pacing the living room, listening to the sound of my own heart, trying to tell myself it was paranoia, but deep down, I knew it wasn't. I had that sinking feeling you get when you know the rug is about to be pulled out from under you, and there's nothing you can do to stop it. I decided to follow her. I parked a few blocks away from the downtown bar she supposedly was at, shivering in the October chill, my fingers numb on the steering wheel. I watched, waited, and then I saw her, not at the bar, not with friends. She was walking down the street with a man I had never seen before, holding his arm like he was part of her, like she belonged to him in a way that she hadn't with me in years. I remember the rain soaking through my jacket, the neon lights reflecting on the wet pavement, and the sharp burning pain in my chest that made it hard to breathe. At that moment something inside me shattered. It wasn't just shock, it was a profound, soul-deep betrayal, the kind of betrayal that makes you question every memory, every smile, every word you thought you knew. I wanted to scream, to run, to disappear, but I couldn't. I just watched frozen, as the woman I thought I knew, the woman I loved, walked into a building with another man, a building that wasn't ours, a building that was now a part of her secret life, a life that didn't include me. And I realized, sitting there in my car, soaked to the bone, shaking uncontrollably, that nothing would ever feel the same again. The next few days were a blur of disbelief and quiet panic. I didn't know how to process what I had seen. Part of me wanted to confront her immediately, scream at her, demand answers, but another darker part of me feared what I would find if I pushed too hard. What if she denied it? What if, in trying to hold on to the life I thought I had, I ended up losing what little dignity I still had left? I started noticing things I hadn't before, small things, at first, subtle but unmistakable once you're trained to look for them. The way she'd answer a call in the other room, just slightly too quickly, the faint smell of cologne that wasn't mine, lingering on her scarf or on the couch where she had sat, the way her eyes would dart to her phone when I walked into a room. Each of these moments felt like little cuts, invisible but bleeding into my mind, reminding me that the world I had believed in, the safe, predictable, shared world of Emma and me, was an illusion. I didn't sleep well. Nights were the worst. I'd wake up in the middle of the night, drenched in sweat, heart racing, imagining her in that other apartment with him. Every laugh she had ever shared with me suddenly felt tainted, every tender moment replaced with suspicion. I went back through old photos on my phone, old texts, little voice memos she'd sent me just to say good morning or I miss you. I started reading them differently, parsing her words for hidden meaning, imagining that in some coded way she'd always been lying. It was maddening, and I hated myself for letting my mind go there. By the weekend, the tension had become unbearable. On Saturday morning, I decided I had to know for sure. The anxiety, the gnawing sense of helplessness, it had become a physical weight on my chest. I remember walking past our apartment building, the November air, sharp against my face, the sidewalk slick with rain. I kept replaying the scene from the other night, her laughing at something he had said, the way she leaned into him, The casual intimacy that should have been reserved for me. And then the most terrifying thought, what if it wasn't just casual? What if it had been going on for months quietly, right under my nose? I started by checking the places I knew she frequented. The cafe by the office, the small grocery store on the corner, even the park where she liked to walk on Sundays. Nothing. No sign of her. No hints. Nothing to confirm the dark images in my mind. But then I noticed something else. Her phone lying on the kitchen counter, buzzing with notifications she always ignored in front of me. Normally I would have never touched it, but now, desperation does things to people. I picked it up, and that's when I found it. The hidden account. A private Instagram account, not linked to any email or phone number I knew, full of pictures that didn't belong in my world. Pictures of her with him laughing, hugging, holding hands, vacation selfies I'd never known about, restaurant dates, movie nights, even candid shots from inside that apartment I had followed her to. There was one picture in particular that made my stomach turn. Emma and him on a balcony in what looked like San Francisco, the city lights twinkling behind them. She was wearing the coat I had bought her last Christmas, the one she said she just wanted to look pretty for me. And there they were, laughing as if the coat, the love, the years we had shared meant nothing. I felt like I had been punched in the gut, over and over again. I remember dropping the phone on the counter, hands trembling, eyes dry but stinging from the pressure. I couldn't breathe. The walls of our apartment seemed to close in on me, suffocating. The coffee machine whirred in the background, the sound tinny and distant, like it belonged to someone else's life. And in that moment I realized just how little I actually knew my wife. I tried to think back, to remember if there had been any signs, anything I had ignored. There had been moments tiny, almost laughable in retrospect, but now they loomed large, like the time she stayed late at a work event, and came home smelling faintly of him, claiming it was just the restaurant, or the evenings when she worked from home, but was always in the bedroom, door closed, pretending to take calls. Little lies that I had brushed off as mundane, and here was the truth, sprawling and undeniable, hidden in plain sight. That Saturday became the breaking point. I knew I had to confront her, but I also knew I needed to be careful. I couldn't let her see me break. I had to stay calm, composed at least on the surface, but inside I was a storm. I remember pacing the living room, remembering our wedding vows, remembering every Sunday morning we had spent together, every time she had laughed at my dumb jokes, every quiet moment on the couch, and every memory now carried a bitter aftertaste. I decided to follow her again that evening. My hands were shaking so badly I had to grip the steering wheel tightly, just to keep the car on the road. The rain had started again, soft now, like a whisper against the windshield. I kept telling myself, just one more night, just one more. I couldn't stop. The thought of what I might discover was terrifying, yes, but the thought of not knowing was worse. And then I saw them, Emma and him, walking hand in hand down 7th Avenue, laughing like the world belonged to them. I remember every detail, his black leather jacket, her red scarf fluttering in the wind, the way she leaned her head on his shoulder when he whispered something funny. It was surreal, like watching a nightmare unfold in slow motion. I felt my stomach knot, my hands gripping the car seat, my vision blurring. I wanted to drive away, to hide, to pretend I had never seen it, but I couldn't. I followed them to a small apartment building in Capitol Hill. They disappeared inside, and I stayed in my car, frozen, rain soaking my hair, heart hammering. I remember thinking about all the promises we had made, all the plans, all the little everyday rituals that now felt meaningless. The betrayal wasn't just in the act, it was in the secrecy, the hidden life, the careful construction of a reality I wasn't allowed to be part of. I didn't leave until late that night. When I finally drove back to our apartment, the streets slick with rain and the city quiet, except for the occasional car passing by, I felt completely hollowed out. My mind was a whirlwind of anger, disbelief, grief, and shame. I hated myself for not noticing sooner, for being blind. I hated her for hiding, for lying, for betraying everything we had. But most of all, I hated the helplessness, the way my life had been quietly rewritten without my consent. The next day, I confronted her, or tried to. I waited until she got home from work, trying to keep my voice steady, trying not to betray the tornado inside me. She smiled when she walked in, completely unaware of the storm about to hit her. I remember the smell of her perfume, the soft rustle of her coat, as she hung it on the rack, the way she looked at me like nothing had changed. I almost couldn't do it, almost couldn't tell her I knew, but I did. I told her, not in the screaming, dramatic way that I had imagined in my head, too much adrenaline, too much anger, but in a quiet, icy tone that made even me shiver. I told her I knew. I told her I had seen the messages, the pictures, the hidden. She froze, her face a mask of shock, confusion and maybe guilt. And then she lied. She lied in the calmest, most casual way possible, saying it wasn't what I thought, saying it had nothing to do with me, saying it was complicated. I remember staring at her, trying to pass the words, trying to breathe, trying to reconcile the woman in front of me with the one I had loved for 8 years. The confrontation didn't give me relief. It gave me more questions, more doubt, more heartbreak. I felt like a man whose life had been stolen while he slept, and now he was left staring at the empty space where it used to be. I remember that night lying in bed, staring at the ceiling, replaying her words over and over, trying to make sense of them, trying to find a shred of truth in the lie. But there was none, only the gnawing, cold reality. My wife, the person I had trusted with my life, was living another life that didn't include me. The breaking point wasn't just the discovery, it wasn't just the pictures, the texts, the hidden account. It was the collapse of trust, the realization that someone you thought you knew could be a stranger. It was the moment when the life you thought was solid, dependable, sacred, revealed itself as fragile, deceptive, and completely gone. I spent the next few days in a daze. I couldn't eat properly, couldn't focus at work, barely slept. I caught myself staring at her sometimes, trying to gauge if she was acting normal, if she felt guilty, if she even cared. Every glance, every word, every gesture became a puzzle I couldn't solve. And through it all, the hidden growing anger and sorrow was slowly, insidiously, eating me from the inside out. I realized then that this wasn't just a betrayal, it was a reckoning, a forced awakening. My world had shifted, and there was no going back to the way it was. And in that moment, buried under a pile of grief, rage and disbelief, I made a decision. I wouldn't let this destroy me. I didn't know how yet, or what it would take, but I knew I had to take control somehow. Somehow, I had to survive this. The days after that confrontation were nothing short of hell. It wasn't the screaming, the crying, or even the shock that got to me. It was the silence, the way she moved around the apartment like everything was normal, the way she laughed at jokes I didn't understand, the way she poured coffee like nothing had happened. I watched her, and I felt like I was witnessing someone else's life, someone I wasn't allowed to touch anymore. Each morning, waking up next to her, felt like opening a door to a room I had once owned but that now belonged to someone else. Work became almost impossible. I tried to focus, to bury myself in code, deadlines, and meetings, but every ping of an email or message made my stomach twist. My co-workers noticed. Claire from accounting, the one who always brought me Starbucks on Mondays, asked if I was okay. I smiled and nodded, the kind of hollow smile that doesn't reach your eyes. I didn't want anyone to know. Pride maybe, shame definite. At home the apartment itself felt like a trap. Every photograph, every souvenir, every little thing we had collected together became a reminder of what was gone. I would sit on the couch, staring at the Polaroid from our trip to Portland, the one where we were standing in front of the Japanese garden, smiling at the camera, and in my mind, I would erase him from the picture, and imagine it had never happened. But I knew the truth. The truth was bigger, darker, and uglier than my imagination could erase. I tried to talk to her again, not shouting, not demanding, just trying to understand. But every time I asked a question, she evaded. She would deflect, talk about work, talk about stress, about needing space, about how complicated everything was, and with each evasion I felt my trust crumble further. The life we had built together, the routines, the plans, the little rituals that felt sacred, was gone, and all that was left was confusion, grief, and betrayal. The mental strain started to manifest physically. I began having nightmares, waking up in cold sweats, heart racing, replaying the same scenes over and over. I would dream of her and him in places I knew intimately, our kitchen, our living room, even our bedroom. In the dreams, they were laughing, touching, existing in a world that had once been mine. I would wake up gasping, convinced for a few seconds that the dream was real. It took everything I had to get out of bed, to make it through the day, to pretend I was functioning. Even my friendships suffered. I found it hard to talk to people, even close friends. The thought of sharing what was happening felt like admitting weakness, like exposing the rawest, most vulnerable part of myself. And I wasn't just sad or hurt, I was angry, humiliated,
and I wanted advice, but I also wanted to scream at anyone who told me you'll get over it or things happen. I couldn't get over it, not yet, and I didn't think I ever would. Family gatherings became excruciating. My parents called, concerned that I wasn't returning their calls as quickly, that I seemed distant during our last visit in December. I didn't tell them the truth. I couldn't, not yet. I couldn't bear the thought of disappointing them, of exposing the mess my life had become. I remember one dinner at my sister Rachel's place, her kids running around, the smell of roast chicken and garlic bread filling the house, everyone laughing, and I sat there, barely touching my food, feeling like I was behind a glass wall, watching a life I was no longer allowed to be a part of. Even mundane things became unbearable. Driving past the streets where we used to walk hand in hand, hearing songs on the radio we had danced to in the kitchen, seeing couples laughing in coffee shops we had frequented. It all cut deeper than I thought possible. I began avoiding those places, taking convoluted routes home from work, and yet no matter how far I ran, I couldn't escape the reminders. Every corner of Seattle seemed to echo her presence, and it was maddening. I tried to find some clarity, some way to regain control. I started documenting everything: texts, emails, screenshots of the hidden account, dates, times. It wasn't revenge, not yet. It was my way of keeping reality tethered to something concrete, something I could hold on to while the rest of my life seemed to slip through my fingers. I remember staying up late on November 7th, poring over the timeline of messages, trying to make sense of it all, trying to understand when it had started, how long it had been going on, and how blind I had been. The answer was brutal: months, longer than I could stomach. I began noticing changes in myself too. I was more irritable, more distant, more prone to sudden bouts of anger. I snapped at coworkers for minor mistakes, shouted at the delivery guy for dropping a package, even yelled at the cat for jumping on the counter. It was like a storm had taken root inside me, and everything around me felt expendable. I hated it, but I couldn't stop it. I hated myself more for it. Emma, for her part, acted almost the same as before, except for the small tiny changes that were almost imperceptible, but made me rage quietly to myself. She avoided eye contact at times, her smile a little too practiced, her laughter slightly forced. I would catch glimpses of guilt, fleeting expressions that vanished the second I looked too closely, and yet she continued living our life with me as if nothing had changed, as if she hadn't just shattered the very foundation of it. There were moments when I thought about leaving. I thought about packing a bag, driving to a friend's place, and just disappearing for a while, taking the night or the week or longer to breathe, to untangle the knots inside me. But then I thought about all the things I had invested in our life: years, money, memories, even the tiny rituals that made our apartment feel like a home. Could I abandon it all? Could I abandon her, even after everything? The thought made me nauseous, but so did the idea of staying. I remember a particular morning in late November. The rain had finally stopped, and a strange winter sunlight filtered through the blinds, casting long shadows across the living room. Emma had gone out, supposedly to meet a client. I sat on the couch, wrapped in a blanket, staring at the floor, thinking about everything that had happened, and then out of nowhere, a wave of hopelessness crashed over me. I realized that this wasn't something I could ignore, and it wasn't something that would magically disappear. The betrayal wasn't just an event, it had become a living, breathing part of my world, and it demanded acknowledgement, demanded confrontation, demanded change. I started noticing other people's reactions too. My friends were tentative, unsure of what to say, and I realized something that cut deeper than her betrayal ever could. People didn't know how to deal with my pain. They wanted to help, but they didn't know. They offered platitudes or awkward silence, and I found myself feeling more alone than I had ever been, even in a crowded room. The work week dragged on, each day a repetitive cycle of pretending, hiding, and replaying moments in my mind. I would glance at my phone, half expecting a message from her, half dreading it, and when I did see her messages, even the mundane ones like "Don't forget your lunch," or "Are you coming home soon?" they felt like poison. Every word, every emoji, every tiny act of normalcy became a reminder of the lie, of the hidden life she had constructed, of the world she had created without me. I couldn't even talk to her without my voice breaking, my emotions teetering on the edge. Conversations that used to be light, easy, and full of warmth became tense, loaded with suspicion, and filled with unspoken accusations. Every glance, every gesture, every casual remark was a potential trigger. I became hyper-aware of her presence, constantly measuring, analyzing, questioning. I wasn't just hurt, I was trapped in a prison of my own making, a cage built from love, trust and shattered illusions. Then came Thanksgiving. I had always loved Thanksgiving, the smell of turkey roasting, the smell of pumpkin pie, the chaos of family dinners, the laughter of cousins and nieces and nephews. But that year, it was unbearable. We drove up to my parents' house in Bellevue. I tried to smile, to participate, to pretend, but it was impossible. Every laughter, every shared memory, every tiny familial ritual, reminded me of the life I had lost, the intimacy I would never have again. And worse, Emma acted as if nothing had happened, chatting easily with my mom, joking with my dad, making plans for the weekend. Every word she spoke was a dagger twisting in my chest. I remember lying awake that night in my childhood bedroom, staring at the ceiling, my parents' voices echoing faintly from the living room. I thought about the hidden account, the pictures, the laughter I had followed to Capitol Hill, the apartment she had gone into with him. I thought about all the small betrayals, the little lies, the careful construction of her double life, and I realized, with a clarity that terrified me, that I couldn't go back. Nothing would ever be the same. I started noticing other things too, financial irregularities, slight changes in her routines, subtle but unmistakable signs of secrecy. Every day, it became more obvious that she had been living this double life far longer than I had known, far longer than I could stomach. It wasn't just emotional betrayal, it was practical, pervasive, infiltrating every aspect of our shared world. And in that realization, something shifted inside me. The anger, the heartbreak, the despair, they were still there, raw and potent, but they were joined by something else resolved. I didn't know what form it would take yet, but I knew I had to act. I couldn't let this continue, couldn't let her keep living in both worlds while I shriveled in silence. I didn't know how I would do it, didn't know if it would be for revenge or closure, or simply survival, but I knew the next chapter of my life wouldn't be defined by her betrayal.
It took me a while to figure out exactly what taking control meant. For days, I paced the apartment, staring at the walls, trying to decide how to even begin. My mind oscillated between two extremes, confrontation and escape. Part of me wanted to storm into that other apartment, scream, tear everything apart. Another part wanted to leave, to pack a bag and disappear, let her have her secret life and start over somewhere she couldn't reach me. But neither of those options felt right. I didn't want to be reckless. I needed strategy, clarity, and most importantly, I needed power over the chaos she had created. It started with small actions. I began documenting everything meticulously: messages, emails, receipts, social media activity, even the little changes in her schedule that previously seemed insignificant. I wasn't just collecting evidence, I was mapping her life outside mine, constructing a timeline of deceit. Late nights became a ritual, my laptop open on the kitchen counter, while I drank cheap whiskey to keep myself from shaking. I told myself it wasn't about revenge yet. It was about knowledge, control, survival. Then came the day I decided to see the apartment for myself. I needed confirmation, tangible proof, the undeniable reality of her double life. It was early December, a cold Thursday morning, and Seattle was gray and wet. The sidewalks were slick, the air sharp with winter chill, the faint scent of roasted chestnuts from a nearby street cart mixing with the wet pavement. I parked a few blocks away and waited. My heart pounded, my hands clenched into fists in my coat pocket. I wasn't just nervous, I was alive in a way I hadn't felt since discovering her betrayal. I watched as she arrived with him, the casual familiarity between them, the way she laughed at something he said, the way her hand rested on his arm. It was like a dagger twisting in my chest, but this time I didn't feel powerless. I felt focused. I waited until they disappeared into the building, and then I took out my phone, snapping pictures, recording evidence. Not because I wanted to shame her publicly, not yet, but because I needed certainty. I needed proof that the life she had built without me was real. Over the next few weeks I became obsessed with constructing the full picture. I spent hours tracking patterns, correlating dates, piecing together evidence that she had been living this double life for months. Each discovery cut deeper than the last, but it also fueled me. The anger, the heartbreak, the shame, they transformed into something more useful: strategy. I wasn't going to be the victim anymore. I wasn't going to crumble quietly in the apartment we had once shared. I would reclaim my life on my terms. I started to change myself too. For months, I had been a ghost of my former self, isolated, fragile, consumed by betrayal. But now, I became methodical. I started working out again, early mornings at the gym, running along the waterfront, letting the cold wind cut through the fog of despair. I focused on my work, pouring myself into coding projects that had been neglected, taking freelance opportunities that challenged me, proving to myself that I could still excel, still exist independently of the chaos she had brought into my life. I rebuilt a version of me that was sharper, calmer, more deliberate. One evening around mid-December I confronted her, not in the apartment, not in anger, but calmly, deliberately. I had collected enough evidence that denial would be impossible. I laid out what I knew, all the facts, all the proofs, every text, every picture, every timestamp. I watched her face carefully, noting each micro-expression, every flicker of emotion. I didn't shout, I didn't beg. I simply presented the evidence, and for the first time, I felt a sense of balance return. Not relief yet, but balance. I had acknowledged the betrayal, faced it head-on, and in doing so, I had reclaimed a piece of my life. The confrontation brought clarity. Emma admitted some things, denied others, but I wasn't interested in passing every lie anymore. I was interested in myself, in what I could do to regain control. I started making decisions about the future, decisions that were independent of her. I considered counseling, separation, even divorce. I weighed the consequences, the practicalities, the emotional toll, and for the first time, I realized something important. The power had shifted. The chaos she had unleashed no longer had the authority to dictate my life. I also realized that I needed allies. Isolation had been my weakness. Connection could be my strength. I reached out to friends I had neglected, to family I had avoided, to mentors at work. I didn't tell them all the details. Some things were mine alone, but I let them know I needed support. Their presence grounded me, reminded me that I wasn't just a man abandoned by love. I was still part of a wider world, still capable of engagement, still capable of living. During this time, I began thinking about morality in a way I hadn't before. The anger, the betrayal, the desire for revenge, they were real, but I realized acting on them impulsively would only drag me down. I had to navigate this with precision, balancing justice and self-preservation, emotion and intellect. I couldn't destroy her life, and in some ways I didn't want to, but I could protect my own, assert boundaries, and rebuild a future where I was the primary architect. Financially, emotionally, logistically, I took steps to separate my life from her. I opened new bank accounts, changed passwords, began the painstaking process of untangling our shared life. Each action was small but significant. It was a way to reclaim autonomy, to assert that my existence wasn't dependent on her, that my happiness wasn't hers to manipulate. Each step felt like a minor victory, a stitch closing a wound I hadn't realized had been open for so long. I also allowed myself to feel fully. For so long I had buried emotions, grief, anger, despair under layers of disbelief and shock. Now I let them surface. I cried in the apartment alone, screamed into my pillow, cursed the universe, cursed fate, cursed her. And each time I did I felt lighter, as if letting go of these raw visceral emotions was necessary before I could move forward. I realized that survival didn't mean shutting down, it meant engaging with life, with pain, with reality and learning to navigate it with strength. December turned to January, and I began to see a glimmer of hope. Not hope for reconciliation, God no, but hope for myself. I started small, long walks along Lake Union, coffee with friends, late-night coding sessions, where I built projects just for the satisfaction of creation. I rediscovered hobbies I had abandoned, interests I had ignored, passions I had shared. Each act, no matter how minor, was a step toward reclaiming the man I had been and forging the man I wanted to become. There were setbacks, of course. Some days the rage would flare uncontrollably. I would see couples holding hands, hear laughter echoing from a nearby bar, catch a whiff of her perfume at a store, and it would feel like all the progress I had made collapsed in an instant. But I learned to ride the wave. I learned that emotional resilience wasn't about never feeling pain, it was about feeling it fully, acknowledging it, and letting it pass without letting it dictate your actions. And then came the moment that truly shifted everything. One evening, I followed her again, not out of obsession, but to confirm boundaries, to see if the life she was leading outside ours could coexist with my own sanity. She was with him, yes, but something had changed. She noticed me, really noticed me. There was a flash of recognition, a moment of something unspoken, and I realized she had power over the narrative she was creating, but I had power over how I responded. I didn't need to confront, chase, or destroy. I just needed to exist, fully, deliberately, and without her deception controlling my life. That realization was transformative. I started making plans, not out of revenge, but out of strategy. I spoke with a lawyer discreetly, just to understand my options. I arranged separate living arrangements, preparing for the eventual separation that was inevitable. I began to envision a life not haunted by betrayal but defined by my own choices, my own agency. Each step was deliberate, each action a reclamation of control. By the end of January, I felt a sense of clarity I hadn't known in months. The storm of betrayal and despair had not disappeared. It was still there, but it had shifted. I was no longer drowning in it, I was navigating it. The rage had become fuel, the grief a compass, the betrayal a teacher. I had transformed from a man caught in the chaos of another's deception into someone capable of shaping his own path, someone who refused to be defined by someone else's lies. By early February, I knew the separation was inevitable. The evidence, the betrayal, the double life, it wasn't something that could be patched up with a few apologies or vague promises. Emma and I had been living side by side in the same apartment, but the emotional distance between us had become an unbridgeable chasm. I had rebuilt myself enough to see that staying would only prolong the pain, allow her deception to continue influencing me, and prevent me from reclaiming my life fully. It was time to act, to make decisions with clarity rather than rage. The morning I left, Seattle was covered in a thin layer of frost. The air had that crisp, almost metallic scent that February mornings often carry, the kind that makes your lungs feel alive but cold at the same time. I packed a bag quietly, deliberately, leaving only the essentials: clothes, my laptop, a few keepsakes that reminded me of the version of myself I was determined to preserve. I left a note, short, unemotional, but factual, explaining that I needed space, that I was taking time to process everything, and that this was not negotiable. I didn't leave it out of cruelty. I left it to assert my autonomy, to reclaim control of my narrative. Driving away, the city lights fading in my rearview mirror, I felt something I hadn't felt in months. Freedom, not happiness. Freedom is not happiness, but the simple grounding sense of agency. I wasn't running from the betrayal. I was stepping into a new chapter, one where I dictated the terms. The road ahead was uncertain, fraught with challenges, but it was mine. I moved into a small apartment in Capitol Hill, ironically close to the very streets where I had first caught glimpses of her life with him. At first it was difficult. Everything in Seattle reminded me of her in some way. The smell of roasted chestnuts on Pine Street, the faint scent of coffee from a corner cafe, the way sunlight reflected off Lake Union, all of it carried memories I couldn't escape. But over time I began to reclaim these spaces. I walked the streets alone, not as a man haunted, but as a man observing, absorbing, and slowly rebuilding. Each step was deliberate, each breath a reminder that my existence was independent of her deceit. Friends and family became my anchor. I reconnected with people I had neglected: Claire, my coworker, who had checked in quietly but consistently; my sister Rachel, who offered unconditional support; even old friends I hadn't spoken to in years. Conversations, laughter, shared experiences, they became threads stitching me back together. I realized that while Emma had broken trust, she had not broken my capacity for connection, my ability to feel, or my power to exist fully in the world. Therapy helped too. I began sessions with a counselor in late February, someone highly recommended in Capitol Hill, talking about betrayal, anger, grief, and self-doubt with someone who had no investment in the story allowed me to process emotions I hadn't dared face. I cried more in those sessions than I had in months. I screamed, I whispered, I recounted memories in vivid detail, and slowly, I started to understand something vital. Betrayal is not the end of a story unless you let it. It can be a turning point, a catalyst for self-discovery, and for reclaiming agency. By March I started seeing the world differently. I was more cautious, yes, but also more alert,
more appreciative of honesty, more deliberate in how I invested my trust. I wasn't bitter. I was aware. I noticed small things in life that had previously gone unnoticed. The way sunlight catches on the rooftops during early morning runs, the quiet intimacy of sharing a coffee with a friend who truly listens, the comforting cadence of coding through a complex problem, and finally finding the solution. Life, I realized, had richness beyond romance and betrayal. I also made peace with Emma, not in the sense of forgiveness, but in acknowledgement. Her choices were hers, her double life, her responsibility. I couldn't control her actions, and I couldn't let them define my future. I stopped following her, stopped checking her hidden accounts, stopped analyzing every minor detail of her life. It was difficult at first. Years of emotional investment don't dissolve overnight, but I realized that my well-being required boundaries. I couldn't remain tethered to someone who had chosen deception over honesty. Legal steps followed. I consulted a lawyer discreetly, discussed separation agreements, financial entanglements, and eventual divorce proceedings. The process was meticulous, frustrating, and at times humiliating, but it was also empowering. For the first time I felt like a man with clarity, not just in emotion, but in action. Every decision, every document, every conversation was a deliberate assertion of agency. Emma and I were untangling a shared life, and I was determined that the outcome would be defined not by her lies, but by my actions. By late March I had begun dating again, but slowly, cautiously, not for validation, not for revenge, but to remind myself that life continues, that human connection is not inherently bound to betrayal, and that trust, though fragile, can be rebuilt. It wasn't easy. Fear and doubt lingered in the back of my mind, but each tentative step into intimacy was a quiet victory, a reclaiming of my capacity to love and be vulnerable. Reflecting on the past months, I realize how profoundly betrayal reshapes you. It exposes weakness, yes, but also reveals resilience. I learned the depth of my own strength, the capacity to navigate grief and anger without being consumed. I discovered that autonomy is sacred, that emotional self-preservation is essential, and that life continues even after deception shatters the foundation you thought was unbreakable. In late April, I visited the Capitol Hill apartment one final time, not to confront, not to spy, but to close the chapter in my own mind. The streets were alive with spring, the faint smell of cherry blossoms mixing with the city's usual rain-washed scent. I walked past the building, noting the subtle changes, the new flower boxes on the balcony, the fresh paint on the entrance, and for the first time I felt peace, not joy, not triumph, but the quiet grounding knowledge that I was no longer bound by what had happened. That chapter belonged to the past, and my life, my future was entirely mine. It wasn't a Hollywood ending. I wasn't suddenly happy, whole, or unscarred, but I was alive, alert, awake, and aware. Betrayal had changed me, yes, but it hadn't destroyed me, and in some strange, ironic way, I was grateful for it. Grateful for the lessons, the clarity, the rediscovery of myself. I had walked through the fire of deception and emerged, not unscathed, but unbroken. Sometimes I still think about her. I wonder if she ever feels the weight of what she did, if guilt visits her in quiet moments, but I no longer dwell on it. I focus on the present, the friends who supported me, the work I love, the city I navigate now with both caution and wonder. I embrace vulnerability, yes, but with discernment. I allow myself to hope, to build, to trust, but not blindly. The resolution isn't about revenge or even reconciliation. It's about reclamation. It's about standing in the aftermath of devastation and declaring, this is my life, I will live it. I will honor my emotions, process my grief, and forge my path. And though the pain of betrayal never fully disappears, it becomes part of the narrative, a scar that reminds you of the strength you never knew you had. As I sit here now, in my new apartment, rain tapping against the windows, coffee steaming on the counter, and the soft hum of the city in the background, I realize that life is fragile, messy, and unpredictable. People you trust may deceive you, choices may hurt you, and love may fracture. But resilience, clarity, and the ability to act deliberately, those are yours to cultivate. And in the end, they matter more than any betrayal, any heartbreak, or any lie. I thought I had lost everything. I thought the betrayal had defined my world, but in truth, it defined only the past. The present and the future, those are mine, and now, finally, I feel ready to live them fully.